Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator of McNally Robinson Booksellers. I'm also going to slightly turn down this microphone as a result of feedback. Hello again. I am so delighted to see so many people gathered here tonight to celebrate the launch of Western Voices in Canadian Art by Senator Patricia Bovey. Rest assured that I will be out of your way momentarily, but I just have a few housekeeping notes to start off. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here in Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. If you have just arrived, that is one worthy of applause. Thank you all. If you have just arrived and are looking for a seat, there are still a few scattered over here, just a smattering, including one directly up front. Now, I won't take up too much of your time. This beautiful book is published by the University of Manitoba Press, and we've already spent quite a bit of time poring over its pages here at the store. It's the first survey of the art and artists from Western Canada, lavishly illustrated with over 260 works reproduced in full color. Personal insights from its author, Patricia Bovey, in her studio visits and conversations with artists informed the text and offered new avenues of understanding Canadian artistic creation in the country's four most Western provinces. We'll be hearing from the Senator in just a moment and from our host this evening, Shawna Dempsey. Before we do, there are just a few very quick housekeeping notes. The first is that there will be a Q&A following the conversation. So at that point, I'll be running around with a handheld microphone, Sally Jesse Raphael style, and we'll approach you with it and place it in your hand. Now, this is not a comment on your ability to project your voice. It is merely to ensure that those watching at home on YouTube can actually hear what you have to say. For those watching on YouTube, you can also participate in the Q&A. Please just write any questions you might have in the live chat, and we'll be sure to put them to Patricia as time permits. Following the event, we'll just ask you for two things, and I will clarify these details a little bit later on in the evening as well. The first is that the store is technically closed at 8 o'clock. So as a result, we would just all ask that you limit your movements to just immediately around the cash desk and by the signing table, as there is simply nobody else to help you. The other thing that I should point out is that we'll ask you all just to remain in place for one moment. This ensures that we can safely transport the Senator over to the signing table before you all descend. So thank you very much for your indulgence on both of those points. Now to introduce tonight's featured guests. Patricia Bovey, LLD, FRSA, FCMA, is former director of the Winnipeg Art Gallery, 1999 to 2004, and the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, 1980 to 1999, and adjunct professor of art history at the University of Winnipeg. She writes and lectures widely on Western Canadian art and is the author of many catalogs and monographs on Canadian art. She was appointed to the Senate of Canada in 2016. Your host for this evening, Shawna Dempsey, is one of Canada's best-known performance artists. She and collaborator Laurie Milan have created pieces such as We're Talking Vulva, Lesbian National Parks and Services, Wild Ride, a carnival midway on Toronto's Bay Street, and The Local Sky Tonight. They have also published many books, including one I'm very fond of myself, entitled Bedtime Stories for the End of the World, Edge of the World, and curated exhibitions. Dempsey shares the role of co-executive director of mentoring artists for women's art, WAWA, with Dana Klemke. Please join me in welcoming Senator Patricia Bovey and Shawna Dempsey.
Thanks so much, John. It is it's a big night, Pat. This is such an exciting thing that you have created. I've got a few questions for Pat. I'm sure you have many more. I'm very excited to see you all. So many of you I know Pat has worked with in all sorts of capacities over the years, and it's just wonderful to be here together to celebrate Western Canadian art. So Pat, the scope of this book shocked me in its scope. It covers over 200 years, 4 provinces, over 400 artists. Was there a moment when you decided to take on this ambitious project, like an inciting action, a germ of an idea that got you started on a project that I understand took over 15 years to create?
Thanks, Shawna. And it wouldn't have happened without so many of you in the room. It's your work that is in this book. All I did was put the words around it. You know, the idea came and went many times. But it came when I was a very young curator at the Winnipeg Art Gallery back in 1970, when the gallery was in the Civic Auditorium up on the 3rd floor, and we would carry the works up and we'd carry the works down. And I see Don Proach there, remember Mississippi Tread, carrying it up from the basement of the Civic Auditorium for that, after that Winnipeg show back then. I hadn't been here very long. As I said, I was very young, very green, and probably shouldn't have had the job, but I'm glad I did because I loved it. Russell Harper came. And he had done the history of painting in Canada, and I loved it. I had devoured it and devoured it and devoured it. And at the time when I was a student at the University of Toronto, they weren't teaching Canadian art. It was impossible. Nowhere in Canada was doing a master's degree in Canadian art history, right? So the pickings were slim. Harper's book was great. And I guess I must have been a little cheeky because I said to him how much I enjoyed the book. But why didn't he do more with Western Canadian artists? And he said, well, I wrote about Emily Carr and Lemoyne Fitzgerald. And I rather sweetly said, well, I think there are a few others. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, that's your job. You'll write that book. And I said, but I don't know anything to write that book. He said, you will. And I said, I certainly can't do it while I'm in a gallery job. He said, the time will come. So Shawna, the time came. And over the decades, I've been collecting notes I've made in studio visits. I've been married to an archivist. I kept every invitation that came through the door, so I knew when the artists were having exhibitions. And so a lot of the material was on hand when I decided to jump in with both feet, thinking of Russell Harper, who by this point was long deceased.
Well, isn't that a lesson to us all? I did to pass the torch.
Pass the torch.
The next generation. The structure of the book is fascinating to me. The first part is chronological, starts in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. The last part puts events in Western Canadian art in a larger geopolitical context relative to Canada and nation building in the world. But the center section is where I see you as a curator because it's thematic. So it's almost as if each chapter is its own exhibition. Do you want to talk a bit about the structure or your process in creating the volume?
That's a really good question. I started in the middle. I started with the thematic discussions because I didn't think, it sounds negative, but I don't mean to. I don't think society really grasps how integral the arts, and particularly the visual arts, are to every aspect of society. And that's why I thought somebody's got to start proving it. And as I looked at the work, and you'll see the artists are woven back and forth across the provinces. For a while, I was thinking, you know, if I got the right balance between Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC, and I thought I was going nuts. Then I thought, well, there's Doug Morton of the Regina Five who went to Kelvin High School here. was Regina 5 with that amazing show in Regina, and then the National Gallery in 1962. And then later on, he was president of Alberta College of Art and Design. And when I was director of the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, he was on my board, but he was also Dean of Fine Arts at UVic. And I thought, so why am I trying to segment these people into provinces when so many people were back and forth? And the themes then became very easy because they're big themes, right? And then I showed it to somebody and he said, but you gotta have a chronological overview. And I thought, I don't want to write a chronological overview. And then I got into it, and it was a really interesting write because that's where I was able to include the development of art galleries. The Winnipeg Art Gallery is the oldest civic art gallery in the country. Its collection is amazing, and there's a lot of the collection in the book. The Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. Emily Carr had tried to start it in 1931, and the mayor of Victoria said, oh, that's all very nice, Miss Carr, but Victoria already has Beacon Hill Park, Kermode the Bear, and the ducks. What more could Victoria want? And it took until 1951 when Sarah Spencer gave an art club the house, and Sarah Spencer was the daughter of the founders of Spencer Stores, which were subsequently bought out by Eaton's. So I found in doing this, I guess I was very glad that I had both an art history and a history background, because that has to come together. The part I had trouble locating, if you talk about structure, was the part on the technical side, because my criteria for the book was what came out of Western Canada that changed the course of Canadian art. I would love to do a book on all the good artists of the West, and Glenn, I'd need hundreds and hundreds of pages, way more than we've got here. But who really made artists and society think differently? And a lot of the innovations in the West were technical. Printmakers, performance art. And so I thought, okay, I'll have that follow the chronology. So all that basis is there when I get going on the themes.
The themes also speak very strongly to marginalization, and arguably all artists in Western Canada have been marginalized by geography, by our daring to be outside of the center of Toronto and Montreal. But there's also particular attention and sensitivity to artists who've been marginalized by race, by culture, by gender. It was identity and questions around identity central in this book. And perhaps even the idea of giving due to artists who perhaps have been overlooked by the Canadian art canon.
There are many artists in the book who have been overlooked by the art canon. And I don't think anybody's looked at it or looked at the images as I was working through it. And I should thank McNally Robinson, because for 3 or 4 years I was doing courses in their community classroom. And that's where I was testing a lot of these ideas. Yes, identity came into it, but identity wasn't a deciding factor that I'll take artist A and not artist B, because the work was the factor, and the contributions were the factor. And at the end, when I was coming up with sort of, what do the images look like? What's the breakdown of the images? I was kind of pleased that it sort of addressed all of that. I would have fixed it if it hadn't. And I think there's much more that can be written. I think there's much more that many more people who need that voice. Having spent my entire career in Western Canada, and I love my colleagues in the East, all of them, don't get me wrong, but what's being written is through that Eastern eye. And there have been wonderful catalogs of Western Canadian artists. There have been wonderful books on certain themes. There have been wonderful books in certain provinces about the provinces. I wanted to take it all and weave together and say, look, Canada, there is a huge, wonderful canon of innovative work in Western Canada, and let's look at it. You'll be surprised, I guess some of the very what we think of as a very major artist. They may not have as many images in this book as others, but they've had other publications, right? I was wanting to bring work out that wasn't as well known. I was wanting to bring work out of the vaults of galleries across the West, whose collections I know intimately. I was looking at corporate collections, I was looking at private collections, and I can't begin to tell you the hours and hours and hours of pure joy in artist studios.
So while you were researching this book, I mean, I don't want to be reductionist at all, but did you find that a Western aesthetic emerged or Western thematic concerns? Like it, in some ways, has this location shaped us artists, or have we shaped this location?
That's interesting. Let's go back to the early years and the early itinerant artists who came west with the explorations, who were on the West Coast, and some of the exploration ships who came through with the railway, who came through with the Hudson's Bay Company. I got really interested in that question. How many of these artists had training? Where had they had training? And did they take their training and change what they were seeing to suit what they'd been taught? Or did they, in fact, adjust how they painted or how they created to what they saw? So I spent many, many happy hours in the Slade. I went to a number of the schools of art in Britain, because many of them trained in Britain. Spent most time in the Slade and found that between 1840 and 1940, there wasn't one class given in landscape painting. And you take a look at the work that these people did when they got here, they came to document what they saw, right? And for the railway, those visual documents were sent back to try to get people to move here, settle here. So I was really intrigued. Going through the work, there were some that never changed the style, and there were others that really let that light and that space and that wonderful horizon line take their work into new directions. And I think that's one reason that abstraction started out here. Right? The first abstract painter in Canada was Bertram Brooker. And when he was up running the theater in Neepawa, he said, if ever I paint, I want to paint music. And there's that amazing painting in the Winnipeg Art Gallery, Sounds Assembling, fabulous painting, 1928. And that, I think, put Manitoba, Winnipeg on the map.
Our society really clings to the idea of the lone genius artist whose ideas spring, fully formed from their mind, usually his mind. I love how even in this short conversation, but in the book, you talk about the mobility of artists and communities of artists and collectives of artists, of print shops, of the Regina Five, of people coming together to inspire each other and grow a movement. Now, I know that this book took over 15 years and probably thousands of hours, but there are probably others who were involved in the creation of this book that
I can't begin to thank everybody who's been part of it. So let me start with the artists. You've been amazing. You've allowed me into your studios. You've shared your ideas. You've made me change my mind on various things. You've opened my ideas to a lot. You've brought me to your exhibitions. You've answered my emails. You answered my letters decades ago before there were emails. You've spoken to me on the phone. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I also thank the galleries. And I have to tell you that Winnipeg is really, really well poised with its collection of Canadian art and Western painting. It's got an amazing collection all around. But for me, with this project, the works in the Winnipeg Art Gallery are stunning and really, really important. And we may know them. I'd love to see them get out more, right? The Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. I'd love those two collections to come together with an exhibition because they dovetail really, really well. And the Mackenzie's been very helpful, the Glenbow, the Vancouver Art Gallery. So I thank the galleries across the country. Their staff have been amazing. And so kudos there. I've already thanked McNally Robinson for allowing me to test and try some of these ideas out. Archives were equally open, as were commercial galleries. Commercial galleries really, and Nicole Fletcher can tell you that, she took on a side job with me to help with all the copyrights, and I thank you for that, Nicole. And she was working with some of the commercial galleries, and they were very helpful in tracking down who owned a work I really wanted to use. And I could be flexible sometimes, but there were a couple that I didn't want to be flexible about, right? And then when we get to the writing of the book itself, Sarah Yates, I thank you. Sarah came on deck with me at the outset as I was figuring out the structure, and was a great help and helped in editing before I submitted it. And then the editing was taken over by the University of Manitoba Press. I think I saw Pat Sanders come in. Pat, when I heard you were doing the editing for them, I was thrilled. She's worked in the West and the West Coast and here, knows so many of the artists, and it was a really, really strong team who believed in the project, and many of you picked me up when I thought, I can't do this. This was a stupid idea. Why did I think I'd do this? So I affectionately thank the book team and David Larson. I want to thank you for taking it over, and your predecessor, David Carr, who had faith in it before it had got very far. And Glenn, working with you at the press was a real treat, and all your staff. And then we get to the design. Frank, it's stunning. He got these 150,000 words or whatever I'd written, and he got these images. I don't know how many we started with, but in the end, we were able to have over 260 in the book. I applaud you. You've got them all in the right place too, and they look beautiful. So thank you very, very much. And then there's the printing. And a group of us went out to Friesen's and spent a day at the press. I love doing that. And the eye of the printers with the color was great. So I couldn't have asked for a better production. Idea team, creative team, productive team. And I should thank the Winnipeg Arts Council. They gave me a research grant many years ago. And the Manitoba Arts Council gave me a couple of writers' grants many years ago. And I should say off the cuff, I wasn't allowed to work on this while the Senate was sitting. So that's probably what made it a little bit longer, because I only had the summers. So the production was long, and it was a big, big team. And on top of that, the Canada Council put money in for the press, as did many donors. And I thank them. I wasn't part of any of that. Can't be, but my heart goes out to them, and I thank them very much.
Well, you bring up something that's fascinating to me. This is a huge project, but while you wrote it, you were also founding and directing the Buehler Gallery at the St. Boniface Hospital and serving in Canada's Senate.
Yes.
How does this project dovetail with your work in insisting on the essential role of the visual arts for a healthy society?
That's really interesting. I'm speaking in Regina on this next week. And the declaration, which is Bill S-208, is now in front of the House of Commons, passed the Senate unanimously, is the declaration respecting the essential role of artists and creative expression in Canada. And it talks about the role of artists, the role of audiences, the need for training, the need for spaces that are accessible. There are 10 key points. And I found myself the other day thinking, isn't that interesting? Because that's exactly what the second half of this book is about. It's about the role of artists in giving voice to environmental issues. It's about the role of artists in health, drawing attention to the health issues around it. It's about issues of the role of artists in war and conflict. It's about issues of artists in issues of reconciliation and residential schools. So all those issues that we're discussing on the floor of the Senate daily, in fact, are here one way or another. So I think I said to Christine the other day, I said, I think this book, now that it's out and done, proves what I've been trying to work on in the Senate, right? So I hope what's going to happen, I hope, and I don't know whether this will happen, I also have a bill for a Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate that is now at second reading in the House of Commons. And I was told by an MP the other day, Senator, we think this might get through before you have to retire. Well, I age out of the Senate in about two and a half months, right? So we'll see whether it happens.
Well, thank you.
But running an art gallery, being a director of an art gallery, you're always juggling lots of stuff. If you can't juggle, there's no way you can. So I just kept on juggling.
Well, on behalf of visual artists in Western Canada and visual artists in Canada, thank you for that work. Thank you for caring about the work we do.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Now, I want to open it up to questions from all of you who are here. And John has got the magic mic that he's going to circulate with. Does anybody have any questions for Pat?
And I will just remind you, if you're watching online, please just write your question in the chat.
While people are thinking, tell you one little story. Friends have been very important to me through this. Friends have read parts of it. Some of the friends who have read parts of it aren't in the visual arts and some are. I was doing some writing out in Victoria and came across a book my deceased husband had on naval art up the west coast of British, well, explorers art up the west coast of British Columbia. And in it, I found a little drawing, little ink drawing, ink watercolor drawing that's in the archives in Australia. And it's of the Queen Charlotte Islands. And it's by a man by the name of George Dixon. And I was so excited with this. So it was between 1765 and 1785. So I was really excited about this. And I phoned a friend who's not in the art world. I said, Sheila, you've got to come over. I've got to show you something. Come for coffee. She came over and I showed her this drawing. And she said, I've got to go. And I said, but I put the coffee on, right? She said, I'll be back. She came back with George Dixon's journal. So in the book, thanks to the Australian archives, I have the drawing and I have the journal entry about that drawing. Turns out her ancestor was George Dixon. He is the Dixon of Dixon Inlet in British Columbia. And he's the Dixon of the Mason-Dixon line. So you never know when you're going through books in the bookshelf that you've never really paid attention to what's going to fall out, right? And cherish those moments. And then I think I told you the other day, I thought I'd have a really sensible filing system, that my files here would be Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And I do have a pied-à-terre in Victoria, which my family called my cottage. And so I thought, well, I'll have Alberta, BC out there, and the filing systems will be just the same. It'll be just so organized, you wait. And as I was doing this, a book fell down in the back of the drawer. And it was a catalog from 1946 from the Art Gallery in Albany, New York, in which, and I quote this, so I'm going to paraphrase it now, in which the author said, the history of Canadian art is young, but on a per capita basis, the quality of Canadian art and the work of artists is far better than that in the United States. And there were 4 Western Canadian artists in that show. So I went through the drawer again, and I found a little 3-way fold-out catalog that Ferdinand Eckhart used to do in the 1960s. And it was a drawing catalog of the work of George Swinton, which included a poem George wrote about drawing, which was amazing. So my message to self was, don't get so fussed about making sure everything's neat and tidy, look behind it, right? Because that's where you're going to find the gems, right? And it was George's poem that gave me that, that's where I thought, oh, I can take this technical section and do it by medium.
Oh. Good thing it's not an auction. Well, speaking of George Swinton, what's going to come after this?
Oh, I've got a couple of writing projects that I'd like to get done.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what else I'm going to do after this. I guess I have to retire from the Senate in the middle of May, and then I'll start thinking about how I'm going to spend my time. I can tell you that Winnipeg is going to be home. I'm not prepared to give up the amazing creative grittiness of this place. I love it. It's in my bones. I was born here. I would like to, and I guess I can say this because I've spoken to the family, I would like to do a book on George Swinton. I would like to take a look at his own art. And as I was researching this book, he got tremendous accolades as a teacher. I think with the Winnipeg Art Galleries coming up, which is, I think, an amazing extension to the WAG, and we did the first feasibility studies while I was director, and I remember talking, as we were doing them, just before George died, talking to him about it. And we had I remember one exhibition up in the gallery one, he and Jerry Toomey were in talking about the installation. And they were the first two really to bring the Inuit sculptures in a concerted visual art historical aesthetic way, bringing them down. The two of them were talking. They were doing one of these kinds of events, right? And they were talking at one point beside a sculpture which had two faces. And I thought, my heavens, that's George and that's Jerry, right? And I think that needs to be pulled together. And of course, George left Vienna. The Viennese and Second World War roots. He served in the Canadian Army, but the plight of his family in Vienna. So all this I want to pull together, and I've given a draft of the structure of that book to his family, and we'll see where it goes. But I can't do any more. Not yet. you gotta let me wait. And I got a couple of other ideas for here and a couple for the West Coast.
So more to look forward to.
But it's not going to be as complicated as this. I'm not going to get myself in the spot thinking, why did I ever think this was a good idea?
Well, that's what you're saying now.
I got witnesses now. I'm happy to.
Yes.
She does have a question now.
I'm really sorry, full disclosure, I work for Senator Patricia Bovey, but I do have a question that I want her to answer when it comes to the work that you've done with the myriad Indigenous artists that you have featured in this book. Because I have worked with you and know the body of your work, how would you say that this book ties into not only reconciliation and, to paraphrase you or to phrase you, reconciliation, but also the importance that art is with a lot of Indigenous cultures and the illicit art trade that is happening right now, and how that ties with that.
You're picking up everything that's on my plate, aren't you? Did you say you work with me? I think as far as art is concerned, it was Senator Murray Sinclair who sat behind me in the chamber before he retired, who said, art validates culture. And in the years I taught at the University of Winnipeg, when I was teaching the history of Canadian cultural policy, my first question was, what's culture? What's culture? In the years there were Indigenous students in the class, the responses were fantastic. The debate was wonderful, it was great. And the answer every year was, culture is the land. The years there weren't Indigenous students in the class, it was much more laborious. I just thought, oh, this isn't going anywhere, right? It was, so the concept of culture is quite different in different communities and people with different diversities. I'm going to say that one of the really important things about visual art, I believe artists and scientists are 20 years ahead of the rest of us. They are innovative. They're not worried about failure. They pick up and try something else if that didn't work, right? But what artists have done, particularly Indigenous artists in the West, they have drawn attention to issues a good 15, 20 years before society's caught on to it. It was back in 1989, I think, at the Art Gallery in Greater Victoria, for instance, that we did the exhibition of Joan Cardinal Schubert's The Lesson. which really was putting it out there for the residential schools. And I saw her brother last week in Douglas Cardinal in Ottawa, and we were talking about that. He said, "You showed that, didn't you?" I said, "Yeah, I think it's amazing." And it's reproduced in here. And I can go through case after case after case. And some of the conversations about residential schools came up when I was doing studio visits. When I started this, before I wrote a word, and Val Vince here, she very kindly hosted a focus group of Indigenous artists from Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And my question was, may I have permission to write about your work? And then we discussed that, and the answer was yes. Then I said, how do you want me to do this? This is what I'm wanting to do. And may I weave your work and your ideas with others, or do you want a special section? They said, please put us together. So I then phoned Richard Hunt out in BC, and I said, Richard, can you do me a favor? Can you do the same thing that Val did here? Can you do it for the Western artists? And he started to laugh. He said, well, yeah, but why? And I said, well, because I don't think, being non-Indigenous, I think I need the permission to write about it. He said, don't you forget that we adopted you back in 1994? I said, well, yes. He said, so you don't need to do it. You're a member of the Hunt family. You don't need to do it. In fact, it would backfire in a funny way. So I didn't do that focus group. But when in submitting the images, and I think, Frank, I'm right, and Glenn, when I submitted them and was counting where we were, I think 20% or slightly more of the images in the book are by Western Canadian Indigenous artists. And it's really significant work. Very significant work, and some of this work is now, some of these people now have work in the National Gallery and the Art Gallery of Ontario, and some of the works are in the Winnipeg Art Gallery collection and other public collections, and some from them themselves. But it's really important work. But when you layer that with what we've been doing in the Senate, or what I've been trying to do in the Senate, and bring visual voices into the Senate, I've done a series of, I'm going to call them exhibitions. They're just tiny installations, we're honest. I've never done smaller exhibitions on smaller budgets that have had more international credit ever. And those were ones, the series I started on honoring Canada's Black artists. And that has hit the international press. And as a result, I was asked to be on the International Curatorial Council for the Pan-African Museum that's currently being built in Ghana. And we have Black artists working in every discipline working on this. We've hired 6 Black curators from across the country to put this together, and it's really, really exciting. And that started from 2 works, one by Isa Akambalaji from here in Winnipeg, and one from Chantal Gibson, who teaches at UBC. So you never know, right? The little things, like those little bits behind the filing cabinet, they begin to add together. Anything else?
Let's bring up a good slide so I can say something.
Do you want me to talk about what's on there?
That's okay. I was actually going to ask, I'm assuming these are photos from the book.
They are.
Oh, and my second question was going to be, are you going to write something similar for children?
For children.
You know, that's a really, really good question. Now you get me to sort of, what dreams have you had in your life, earlier years of your life, that never panned out? In my curatorial days at the Winnipeg Art Gallery back in the 70s, I worked really hard to try to get the Manitoba Ministry of Education to do a history of Manitoba or a history of Canada just from images, paint, works of art. And at that point, the collection was strong enough to do that. Now it's really strong to do it. right? And I'd love to do something like that. But Ma was doing a lot of work with children and very impressive work with images and artists and children.
Yeah, we're just about to begin on a project of creating art education materials using Manitoba artist images for use in schools. Yeah.
The other thing I should say about a lot of this is issues of copyright. And copyright is complex, and as I said, I thank Nicole for all the work she did. It's my hope, I have 5 cabinet ministers so far who have agreed that artists' resale rights will be in the next Copyright Act of Canada.
That's great.
And we've been working on this for many years. And the kinds of comments I'm getting, well, it'll be 5% of the resale. And so I'm hearing, oh, well, that's not going to be that. It'll just be, $20 or $500. That's not going to make a difference. And I said, it is going to make a difference because the 3rd largest employer in Canada are the arts and culture industries, and the greatest percentage of working poor living below the poverty line are artists. So there's this great differential, and we've got to do something about that. The other question I'm getting is, how's it going to be done? And I said, France has been doing it for 100 years. Britain's been doing it for 25, 30 years. Let me give you the names of the people who are dealing with it, right? It's been done. So I really hope, and it won't come through while I'm still in the chamber, but I can tell you I'm going to bird dog that. And Christine, you also asked about the illicit trade, which is something I'm working on. Canada has the softest border for illicit movement of arts and pieces of architecture. And so trying to bring light to that. And there's there are several international rings that are now forging, frauding Indigenous art. And we're working on that and at the moment tracking 3 cases in particular so that we can shed some light on it.
We do have some questions from online. The first one comes, and you'll forgive my pronunciation, from Thamar Linklater, who says, I don't know if you remember me, but I was your research assistant in 2016. Congratulations on your hard work. What do you envision for the future of Western Canadian art? I mean, where do you see it going?
Oh, that's a good question. Thank you for the research you did. I've had amazing research over the years that have been done by volunteers at the Winnipeg Art Gallery way back when, students, and I thank everybody. Where do I see Western art going? I want it to take the center. I hope that the work by artists from Western Canada will be at the forefront of Canadian art, historically and in terms of contemporary work. People think that the Group of 7 were the first artists to paint oil paintings outdoors. Well, it was here in Red River with William Hind in 1862, 1863, right? So I want the knowledge of all of this to get out front, and we can do that. We can do that collectively.
Thank you so much. The next question is, it takes a great eye and a receptive brain to pull the bits from behind the filing cabinet to create the links and the story. Do you have a favorite curator who continues to inspire you? And congratulations, Senator Bovey.
Thank you. I don't have a favorite of anything. I don't have a favorite artist. I don't have a favorite curator. What I do have are people I admire from coast to coast to coast. And there are people I admire internationally, and there are some projects, Canadian projects, that I would like to see happen overseas. I think we've got the collections to be able to do it, and maybe after I start the next chapter of my life, I can draw some of those people together.
And were there any more local questions? Well, with that in mind, I would turn things over to you folks. If you wanted to chat more or offer any closing comments you might have, that would be wonderful.
Well, maybe I'll just ask one final question, sort of akin to one of those ones that came online. What do you hope to come out of this book? What do you hope this book will inspire?
Well, I hope that people will pick up and write about the people I didn't. I'm very aware that there are people and there's art that should be in this book that isn't, and I tackle that question in the preface. Space, time, you can only do so much. And in the end, as I said, my starting criteria was the significance of the work in changing the course of Canadian art. And secondly, in the end, it was people I worked with. You know, if I was, and sometimes the accessibility of work. There are pieces that I would love to have had reproduced in here, and we couldn't find who owned the rights, or we couldn't find the piece, or we couldn't find where the artist was. Artists are very mobile, you know. It's really hard to catch up with some of you to find out, say, hey, I want to reproduce painting X, and if I can't find you, I can't use it, right? So I hope it'll inspire the next generation of art workers and artists, the same way Russell Harper inspired me, because it's a rich field. It's an amazing field. It's an international language, and if we don't train people or encourage people to get involved in this international language, they're missing out. And I find it interesting. We all travel, and when we travel, where do we go? We go to the Louvre, we go to the Pitti Palace, we go here, we go there, but we don't seem to do that so much at home. And I want to change that. I want people to take pride in the works that are here, that you know, whether they're in university collections, whether they're in public collections or corporate collections. I want people to have a sense of pride. And I also hope that it helps open up people's awareness of artists' work, and may it increase some sales, may it spark interest in collectors, and just let that ball keep rolling. Just my hope.
Thank you very much, Senator Patricia Bovey.
I want to thank you. So I want to thank you. You were very kind to do this, and I want to thank all of you for coming. And again, my heartfelt gratitude goes to all the artists in the room, all the collectors in the room, and everybody who was on my personal book team or the wider book team. It was amazing. And there were several of you who really did pick me up when I thought this was not a good idea.
Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you to everybody for your questions and for your attention here this evening. As I mentioned earlier, we will now be moving along to the signing portion of the evening, so there are just a few details to keep in mind. The first thing is you will hear an ominous announcement as you get into place indicating that the store is closing. This does apply to the store at large. It does not necessarily apply to you folks, as we will certainly stay open while everybody is getting their book signed. The only thing we do ask is that after 8 o'clock, you please keep your positions centrally in the store and do not wander off into the various corners, as we simply have no booksellers to help you out. So we're very grateful for your indulgence when it comes to that point. There are copies of the book available at the central cash desk. I would encourage you in this case to purchase a copy of the book before you get into line, simply because our cash registers will be closing down just before 8:30. If you do happen to be in line and need to pay for your book, please do remember to pay for your book before you physically leave. That would be fantastic, and we would be appreciative. And we will just ask you to remain in place for one brief moment while we safely transport Senator Bovey over to the table, where she will then be happy to sign any and all copies of this book for you. It will not be a dramatic transportation. You've seen the richness of some of the art on this display to my left. You've also heard some of the senator's words, and the richness of the art is complemented by the richness of the text. This is an incredible book, just a massively high quality, superlative piece of art. So we're so grateful to the University of Manitoba Press for publishing it, and of course to Senator Patricia Bovey for pulling it all together. Please join me one final time in thanking Senator Patricia Bovey and Shawna Dempsey.